Hello, everybody, and welcome to that JRPG podcast episode 6. Today we got one of my favorite action RPGs of all time, and that is Odin Sphere, a game that was originally released on the PlayStation 2 and then remastered on PS3, PS4, and PS Vita. So I have played every single version, believe it or not, but the only ones that I have ever finished are the PS2 and PS4 releases, though I put a lot of hours into the PS Vita version. Anyway, so I can vouch for all 4 versions, and this is an absolute must play. You already know that. It's one of the most heavily recommended action RPGs in my channel for very good reasons, because this game is almost perfect. It's a masterpiece no matter where you play it. But yes, there are huge differences between the PS2 and the PS2 original version and the let's just call it the original version versus the remaster. Many differences you need to be aware of. But first, a little bit of history of my story with this game. It isn't that special, but it's kind of funny. You know, I didn't know about this game at all whatsoever. You know, it came out in 2007, and that is the year when I finally got my PlayStation 2 for the first time. Everybody had a PS3 already, but I didn't. You know, I was just entering the beautiful and awesome world of the PlayStation 2. And within 1 year alone, it became my favorite video game console of all time, and it is still my favorite nowadays. So, anyway, I digress. So, real quickly, I went to a flea market precisely to buy some PS2 games, and this game had just been released. And I stopped by this dude that I used to buy a lot from, because he was basically quality, you know, discs were in good condition, and the games were, functionable, and I had barely had any issues with this guy before, so I trusted this guy, right? So all of a sudden, he was the one who sold me into it. He was like, "Hey, this new game came out," and I was like, "Okay." The guy had never recommended a game to me before. He knew me, of course, and we had made some small talk in previous occasions, but all of a sudden, this was his first time saying, "Hey, you gotta play this game, it's awesome," and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is this, and I saw at the cover, and it kind of looked like an RPG, like my cup of tea, okay. And on the inside, I thought this guy has noticed that I only buy RPGs, or that I mostly buy RPGs. And he was like, "Yeah, it's an RPG, but it's kind of like, like retro, like in 2D and blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "What the hell?" So I got very intrigued with the game, and of course I bought it, took it home, played it, and fell in love with it. And yeah, he was right. The game played in 2D, the game felt retro, because 9 out of 10 video games since the PlayStation 1 era had been in 3D, with 3D environments, 3D graphics, and along came Odin Sphere to influence the heck out of the world, just like Symphony of the Night did, to tell the world that 2D games were still beloved, and that they were badass, and that people were still playing them and loving them and buying them, most importantly. So Odin Sphere did all of that. There's a huge influence by this game, and we have seen several games influenced by Odin Sphere. Even in recent years, it's still a game that's influencing a lot of games. Of course, it's not as influential as a Souls game, or a Chrono Trigger, or even Shin Megami Tensei, or Pokemon. No, right? But it's influenced several games out there. Most games that I've seen that are action RPGs in 2D, it's almost impossible not to compare them with Odin Sphere, unless they're like Metroidvanias, which usually get compared to Symphony of the Night or the Metroid series. But yeah, have you played Sword of the Vagrant? That's just one of many examples of games heavily inspired by Odin Sphere, or Vanillaware's other works. Now, so yeah, that's how I fell in love with the game, but as you probably already know, it also pissed the crap out of me. This is a game that made me rage quit several times. On both my playthroughs, this is a game I've beaten 2 times, on the PlayStation 2, and 1 time on the PlayStation 4. Maybe it's time I beat it again also on PS4. Maybe one day. So yeah, I've beaten this game 2 times on the PlayStation 2, and it's a brutal game. Even on easy mode, it's ridiculously tough, and it's not unbalanced. It's not like some bosses will be a walk in the park and others will be like really hard. No, this is one of those games that are like hard, and they get harder and harder and harder the more you advance. But what's more annoying about this game is that it has a couple of fatal flaws that kind of kill the original version as opposed to the remaster. Because before the remaster, This was still a heavily recommended game in my channel. I was still singing praises about it. But let's be honest, it's you were stuck with this original version no matter what. And back then, even though I also thought of it as one of my favorite games on the PS2, it wasn't the first places, it was always like in number 7 or 8, not close to the top 5 because, yeah, it had a lot of flaws. And then the remaster came out and you know the rest. So before we get to the differences in gameplay and the versions, as always, we're going to start with the story and characters, and when we get to the gameplay section, I'll make the comparison between both versions, okay? So here it is, the story. This is a game that, as you probably already know, it has Valhalla, Ragnarok, and Valkyries, the North mythology. And this was back in the day when Valkyrie Profile was still trending. In fact, Silmeria had been released about, like a year ago, probably less, and then all of a sudden comes Odin Sphere and everybody's like, oh, it's like Valkyrie Profile because it's also in 2D, with Valkyries and blah, 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 yeah. But it was way more than that. This is a game that, Valkyrie Profile focuses way more on precisely the journey of the Valkyrie, and her place in the Norse mythology, in the Ragnarok War, and Odin, and blah, blah, blah. And this game expands a bit more on the lore of the mythology, okay? And there's like different characters. As you probably already know, the game has 5 protagonists. And no, this is not one of those where you can choose one and just beat the game with. No, you gotta beat the game with all of them. In fact, it's sequential, it's linear. Okay, and you can't just pick whoever you want, not even in the remaster. This is a game that starts you off with Gwendolyn, the Valkyrie, as the main character, hence the comparisons to Valkyrie Profile. And then you play as another character, and then another one, and another one. Each arc, let's call them arcs. Each arc, in the original PS2 version, they can last about, let's say, believe it or not, 3 hours. Yeah, 3 to 4 hours, depending on the difficulty you play. And then you play on normal or hard, you're gonna have to grind a lot and gather a lot of items to consume food and level up and blah blah blah. We'll get to the gameplay section later, but what I'm trying to say is that the harder the game, it all depends on how you play this. But both my playthroughs of the original PS2 version are like 20 something hours, whereas the remaster is like 40 hours. So it's actually, the original version was actually story mode on easy, which is still kind of difficult, very difficult, dare I say. It's pretty short, okay? It's 25 hours max, no matter what you do. So each character is a short story. It's not like you'll be spending 10 hours with that one character alone, unless you do absolutely everything, and explore everything and grind and play on hardest difficulty and whatever. If you play even on normal, it shouldn't need you more than 5 hours max per character. So that, in my opinion, it works really well for the story, because it is a little bit disjointing, and it's a little bit, it kind of like takes you out of place, whenever you change character. Each arc kind of concludes, but there's a chronology that also confuses you. Like the second character his arc takes place like what happened before the events of Gwendolyn, and then the third character is like in the middle, and then they jump all over the place. Like some events of the third character happened at the beginning of Gwendolyn's arc, but some other events happen like after her whole arc. It's really hard to explain this without confusing you, I know that, but trust me, it's very interesting, and there is a chronology of events that you can watch. There's like an option in the menu where you can just see what events happened first, and when you complete the game, you're like, oh, you're fascinated. You're like, oh, because as the game progresses, you start realizing, oh, this scene is, what's going on? Wasn't Gwendolyn in this place, and now suddenly in the second arc she's in this other place, or in the fourth arc she's in it confuses you, but you start noticing that. So it may be very confusing for a lot of people, and I know I'm making it sound like it's overly complicated, but it may be, but in a good sense. That's the magic of Odin Sphere's storytelling. It's a story about, yes, the world of Ragnarok. It is practically the Ragnarok, and it all revolves around, it's called Odin Sphere, Well, that's a spoiler, so we'll leave it at the end. But it's got a lot to do with Odin, who is an antagonist in this game. You fight him several times with different characters, and well, he's Gwendolyn's father, which makes him an interesting character. And it's so hard to talk about him without spoiling. But the best I can give you right now is that he is a very multidimensional character. Okay, there are antagonists in this game that are like straight up evil, but most of them are not. Most of them are simply, characters, people like you and me that have different perspectives in life, different beliefs, and when they're in power, they are trying to do what's best for their kingdom, for their people, and obviously for themselves. But in case of Odin, he's also trying to do what's best for his daughters, but he doesn't really see his daughters as women or as as his daughters. He sees them as warriors, as his subordinates, as his right and left hands. You know what I mean? So it's pretty interesting. That's what makes the story in this game so interesting, because instead of going full cliche and stereotypical, it offers that level of writing that is just multidimensional. That is just the type of story that will make you think and question the characters and agree with them at some times and disagree with them in others. That's when you finally... I've been saying this for years, man. And that's also how I like writing my books as well. To make people think, to make like, oh my god, fuck this character, it's just, oh man. And then 2 chapters later, this character, now I agree with this character, blah, blah, blah. You see what I mean? So that's what makes a good story. Out of nowhere, nothing to do with Odin Sphere, but I don't know why I thought of Breaking Bad. That's the same. That's why the show is so popular, because constantly you're agreeing and disagreeing with the characters, and at the end of the day, they're just people like you and me with different opinions and mentalities, and strengths and weaknesses. Okay, and another great freaking thing about Odin Sphere is that, without spoiling anything, every single important character, not just the 5 protagonists, almost every single very important character, including Odin, faces at some point their weaknesses and realizes that they were wrong about this or right about this. That's incredible storytelling. Yeah, the story is excellent in this game, and it will make you think and it will make you feel challenged. That's incredible storytelling right there. Now, the goal of the game, before we move to the characters, well, I guess it's kind of hard to talk about the story without jumping straight into the characters or jumping back and forth, because this is a character-driven game. There have been other JRPGs, well, okay, most JRPGs are character-driven, right? But a lot of them can actually focus on the main story, and there's not that much importance to the characters unless it's optional. Like the Fire Emblem series is pretty well known for this. These are games that are not exactly character-driven. They're more about the protagonist and a couple of other important characters, and that's it. They focus on the story. But you do get the optional dialogue between some characters, the scenes, and to the bonding and the waifus and whatnot, So that gives you way more character development than in the main story. But if you stick to the main story and ignore everything, they aren't exactly character-driven games, which is an irony considering how many characters each game has, right? But they aren't what I will call character-driven. But yeah, like I said, there are exceptions, but Odin Sphere is not one of those. And it's not really a story-driven, because the story is just that. Yeah, it's the Ragnarok, and everybody's fighting in the war, the end. Fighting for their own purposes, to stop it, to have to fulfill some agenda, to whatever, everybody's got their own reasons. So now I'm going to jump straight into the characters, okay? But the last thing that I want to say about the story is that it connects, how a very simple plot greatly affects every character's life and decisions, and how the events unfold is what creates this amazing development for each and every single one of them, including Mercedes, which is my least favorite character in the game, but we'll get to her. So first, there's no main character here. Okay, this is not one of those like, oh, Gwendolyn is the main character. Why? Because she's the first party member you get. She's the first playable character you get. I said party member, but you have no party members in this game. Everybody acts on their own. No allies in battle. Not even for like a one small mission or no. You're on your own. You fight as Gwendolyn, then Cornelius, then Mercedes, then Oswald, and finally Velvet. Okay. So Gwendolyn is the Valkyrie, Odin's daughter, and therefore there's a lot of insight on her behalf. She feels kind of like in... well, I'll be honest, I don't know what it's like to be on her shoes when it comes to family, but I think anybody can relate to her when you have an authoritarian figure who may be, in your case, your father or your mother. In my case, it was both. But when I was a teenager, it was my father, and I don't want to get personal here, but let's just say that, we had a lot of issues, okay? We had a lot of disagreements, and I did feel kind of oppressed by my own father when it came to, a lot of things in my life. So, obviously, Gwendolyn, despite the fact that most of you listening to this podcast right now, myself included, despite the fact that we are not soldiers and our parents, they don't exactly treat us as if we were their assistants or their generals or soldiers or whatever. We do have, most of us have parents, even if you don't, you probably did at some point. But my point is that this is a character that struggles a lot with that. And there's a tragedy that happens at the beginning. I don't know if I should spoil it. Well, I guess it happens right away, when the first 20 minutes of the game, it happens. So Gwendolyn has a sister called Griselda, also, Odin's daughter. But there's something going on with Odin that I'll spoil at the end. But let's just say that it's kind of messed up. But Griselda dies. And how Odin reacts to Griselda's death is what starts breaking Gwendolyn and starts questioning not only herself or her place in the family, but also her place in the army and her place in the war. And that's what makes Gwendolyn such a fascinating character, because she starts getting these psychological issues. She already has one since the beginning, but it starts getting like more intense as you advance. And don't worry, she doesn't go crazy, or something like that, But actually, the psychological issues are the bare minimum of the game and her development. But they are important, And her interactions with other characters, specifically Oswald, who is the fourth protagonist in this game, are fascinating to say the least. She's a very unique character. And we'll get to the spoilers part at the end, but her relationship with Oswald is just impressive. It's not cliche. It's not an anime trope. It's something that you rarely see even in movies, shows or whatever. This type of romance. It's kind of like, well, it's happened before. It's been seen before. It's not 100% original, but it's there, and it's against the cliche, which is something I found really interesting. These two, Gwendolyn and Oswald, are my favorite couple. One of my favorite couples in JRPG history. I did a video on that on my second channel with the fans in the Q&A. If you want to check it out, we chose our favorite couples, and I remember it was like Reen and Laura from Trails, Welking and Alicia from Valkyria, and yeah, obviously I mentioned Gwendolyn and Oswald. Anyway, moving on to Cornelius is perhaps one of the least interesting characters, because he's in love with Velvet, the fifth protagonist, but he's a prince, and Velvet is like she's a witch, and she's practically a pagan, so that's also a cliche, like the prince, the royalty falling in love with a heathen pagan witch, that's seen before, okay? But the interesting thing about Cornelius is that, without spoiling anything, he gets turned into a rabbit. Yeah, like Zelda Link to the Past. But he still has his personality and can talk, and... Well, rabbits are called pukas here, but they look like freaking rabbits. So he gets turned into a puka, which is this kind of like magical, mystical creature. And his entire arc is to try to find a way to talk to Velvet and tell her who he is. Like, hey, it's me. your beloved, and also to get his human form back. So as a result, he doesn't get the best development, but he does get development. He is the game presents this character to you as if he was just a passionate prince whose goal is just that, to find a way to be with his beloved and defy the royalty, which is a freaking cliche. But the journey to get from when he's transformed into a puka to the end of the game, that's what makes it interesting. Cornelius is not as interesting as Gwendolyn or other characters in this game, but I found him to be actually the least interesting out of the 5 main characters, because his arc is a bit of a cliche, and he just doesn't get the best development. But he does get development. He realizes things are not what they seem. He matures, he grows up, and he has a much better perspective near the end of the game than the one he did when he started, So, yeah, despite being a cliche character, he gets this development, and it's really interesting. Moving on to Mercedes, whatever you want to pronounce her. She's the fairy princess. She's also a princess, the daughter of the fairy queen, who's heavily involved in the war with Odin in the Ragnarok. Mercedes is an interesting character, let me tell you why. At the beginning and during the first couple of hours, for about half of her arc, is kind of like extremely cliche. Extremely boring, generic, She's actually someone you kind of start growing to hate and dislike. She's the spoiled princess, she's a brat, and she's like, acts like the type of anime character that often makes stupid decisions, reckless, not so reckless, but dumb. She's a scary the cat, and yeah, she has a thing for this other character who's a spoiler character, and let's leave it at that. So at the beginning you're like, wow. Because when you start the game, like I told you before, you forcefully play as Gwendolyn. You can't just play as Mercedes as your first character. No, you gotta play them in order. So you start with Gwendolyn, and you get this impressive story arc and great character development and kind of mature and a bit depressive and tragic and blah, blah, blah. You're like, yeah, this is dark. And then you get to Cornelius and okay, it's okay, you don't lose hope. And wow, also Cornelius, I forgot to mention, he does go into some places that are like really dark and messed up. So you're like, oh, okay. So the game still has you interested. But when you get to Mercedes, you're like, oh my god, so this is the cute anime loli type of girl. I mean, she's not a loli, but that type of humor, And yeah, you're like, oh man, well, okay, I kind of needed a break from all that darkness and tragedy and despair, because you do feel Cornelius' despair for trying to get his human form back and trying to tell Velvet and reach her and tell her, it's me, But what I want to say in defense of Mercedes is that she gets this really cool development. She does grow up, and at the end of the game and at the end of her arc, she's someone else. Like, she matured. Like, she's now... Well, I'll spoil at the end, but she's now this character that understands her place in the war and her place in royalty and her responsibilities, And also, the troubles in her heart because she falls for this other character. So yeah, at the end of the day, you're like, okay. Yeah, I'll be honest, guys, the first time I played this game, I still kind of disliked her, but the second time I played it, I kind of grew this appreciation for her, and at the end, I found her a bit more interesting, or her development, not as a character, her development, I found it more interesting than the one Cornelius gets. Anyway, moving on to Oswald. Oswald is one of my favorite characters in video games, male or female, whatever, I just love this guy, and I relate to him so much because he's technically a social reject, which is what I've been my whole fucking life, nowadays in YouTube, So he is that kind of character because he has this, the fact that he has this darkness and special power that transforms him into some kind of demon, that's a cliche, that's an anime cliche, but how he lives his life secluded, with barely any parent, with no parents, no knowledge of his parents. He's basically an orphan and barely any social interaction. And he's basically used as a mercenary. That's how his arc starts. He's basically a powerful mercenary, and he's fighting for this king from the Inferno, the Inferno King. So And then he switches allegiances, and there's betrayal, and blah blah blah. And there are some very interesting plot twists in his story. Now, in my opinion, Gwendolyn and Oswald have the best character development and the best arcs and the darkest and most mature and interesting story arcs and development, like I mentioned before. So it gets pretty intense and it gets pretty interesting, and it's just this character, well, I guess the same goes for every character in this game. They are developed in a way, and their dialogue and their situations and what they go through and their reactions and how they react to this situation or to this event, I think they were made that way on purpose so players could relate more easily to each and every single one of them. And trust me, you do get in their shoes at some point of the game, and you do understand most of what they go through and the decisions they made. That's also the magic of the story and the character development of Odin Sphere. So Oswald starts this relationship with Gwendolyn. The first time he lays eyes on her, well, it's like love at first sight, but it's mostly from Oswald's side of, like Gwendolyn's like terrified when she meets him. She's like afraid of him, but she's also like, there's something about him, you know what I mean? Yeah. But then Oswald is like the first time he's like immediately in love with her. And despite being this social reject, this person who's barely had any social interaction in his life, yeah, some things may come as cold and antisocial and etc., but other things about him are like, this is what makes Gwendolyn truthfully fall in love with him throughout the game, because of how the things he does and the things he says. Like one of the best lines ever in romantic history of the entertainment business is when Oswald tells Gwendolyn, I want to see my reflection in your eyes. That, I don't know if someone ever said that before. Odin Sphere, I don't know, man, let me know, please. But that's, yeah. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe one day I'll be able to say the same to a woman. Yeah. So I fell for this couple, man. I fell for these characters, and I love them. They're extremely beloved characters. And actually, my fanboyism of Oswald is insane. When I was back in 2008, I kind of started a role-playing group. We were used to write stories together, that kind of role-playing. Still going nowadays. Not by me, by many people out there. I quit role-playing several years ago. But I used to do stories and, in Messenger. Anybody remember Messenger, Hotmail, And I also used to do stories in like forums and blogs, That was really popular back in the day. I don't know if it still is, but I know it's still going. But I don't know if it's popular or not anymore. Maybe not because of the political division of people and the hatred and negativity in social media. But when I started, nobody knew me by my name Erick. Everybody knew me by Oswald because I used to roleplay as Oswald. But I only roleplay the guy in like 2 stories, In every other story, I play different characters. But people still knew me as Oswald because of this character. Yeah? Just a small trivia about me. Anyway, last character is Velvet. Yes, she's sexy, she's hot, and she's a bit of a tragic character. This is a cliche, but it's not seen too often in anime or video games even. But she's that kind of character who's like extremely beautiful and gorgeous and sexy as fuck. Perfect body and whatever. And she takes advantage of that, But she's also like broken on the inside, depressed, melancholic because her life just isn't working out. And she has a lot of responsibilities. I'm not going to spoil her responsibilities, but she's in the middle of it all, and pretty much a lot of the things in the main story that also affects all characters happen because of her, And the more you realize this, the more you start seeing Velvet with other eyes. But yeah, I mean, her personality is like, she's similar to Gwendolyn, but she's stronger. Gwendolyn is presented to us as an insecure character and someone who lacks the confidence to stand up for her beliefs, whereas Velvet is just like that from the beginning. She's a grown-up woman. She's not like in her 20s. She's also like probably 18 or 19, I don't know, years old in the game. But what I'm trying to say is that she has the mentality of a 30-year-old woman, or as if she was a mother. She has no kids, but she acts like one. She has this motherly attitude and behavior to her that I found like really interesting. This mature, this sense of responsibility, especially because of her brother, who's a younger brother, and she feels like responsible. And Velvet is somewhat that her story arc is very interesting because every chapter is one thing after the other. One first chapter is about this, trying to do this, and then in the second chapter she's another entirely different mission, and it drives her crazy, and up until the point where she doesn't break, but until the point where at the end, like, she realizes what she needs to do to end it all, like, this is enough, and I have had enough of this bullshit, So yeah, a very interesting character, Velvet, and the development she gets is also like the same as the other characters. She sees ways and she sees life and in a different way at the beginning, and at the end, her perspective has been shaped by the events she's lived through. So the maturity, despite being an already mature character, she gets this incredible development. Anyway, it's been half an hour, and that's all for the characters. Let's just move straight away to the music and the graphics. The music is composed by legendary composer Hitoshi Sakimoto, who's done almost every single Vanillaware game. He nailed it, man. This is a really cool soundtrack. I'm usually not a fan of this composer, but with this specific game, the music is so magical. He really transports you into this colorful, magical world with unexpected twists and darkness lurking within it, and he makes you feel that, actually, there's a character called Alice, kind of like the girl in Shining Force, the original Shining Force games. There's a girl that reads the books, of the heroes, so she's basically doing that. At the beginning, you control Alice in an attic, and she reads through Gwendolyn's story first, and then Cornelius, then the other characters, and then the ending. Okay? And why am I bringing this character up, even though that's all she does? You do control her, but you just move her from left to right and pick the books you want to read. So that's all you do. Not really a very important character, but what makes this character fascinating in relationship with the music is that the moment you arrive at that attic, because that's the beginning of the game, it starts you off with that character, and then you pick up Gwendolyn's book, and like 2 minutes later you're controlling Gwendolyn. But the moment, what I'm trying to say is that you go into the attic and you feel like you're Alice, like you're that little kid, in a secluded place where no one's gonna bother you, and you're just gonna sit there and sink into your imagination. I know most of you don't read books anymore, but for those who did read books when they were kids, or still read books nowadays, that's the magic. You just immerse into that magic. And for a world like this, that is the music that will play in my head if I was reading a book like this with this kind of universe. That's what I'm telling you. It's almost a perfect soundtrack. It's not one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, far from it actually. But for a game and a universe and a world like this, it's perfect. It goes magical and kind of childish and kind of intriguing, when it needs to, but also kind of dramatic and tragic and depressing when it needs to. Oh man, great soundtrack by this guy, and you really do feel it in almost every single part of the game. Even some of the stages have this music that tries to be melancholic and nostalgic, but also distressful, and it just fits right in perfectly. Sakimoto nailed it. Amazing soundtrack. Now the graphics, yeah, I know. You all probably made the same face. Like, this is one of the most fucking beautiful video games in existence, man. This is. If I had to, I've never done this top 10. Maybe I will one day. But if I had to do like a top 10 most beautiful RPG, this will be number one. I'm not kidding. Especially the remaster looks ridiculously beautiful. But of course I'm being biased because this is the type of art style I grew up with, 2D graphics. Okay, but the backgrounds, the stages themselves, the places you visit, they're also full of magic and full of color, full of detail, full of specific things. It's not like, oh, you're going to the Inferno place and it's gonna look boring and repetitive. And no, it varies a bit. The scenery is different on each area. There's different enemies in there, and the enemies have different colors to them too. And it's, man, impressive graphics and the art style. Okay, the art style, I know it's controversial. Not as controversial as the one in Dragon's Crown by the same company, but it is controversial. There are a few characters, like the Fairy Queen, for example. Oh man, you look at her and you're like, what? I mean, that looks... damn. Like super incredibly slim body and huge tits. That's Kamitani for you. That's his style. So it's criticizable. We all love to criticize that, but I also like to respect that because every artist is different. They all have different art styles. And this exaggeration, I've always wanted to say this, these kind of exaggerations kind of play a little bit in favor of the game, not just in terms of publicity, because it's controversial. People are going to look at it and talk about it and maybe even buy the game just to see what kind of fucked up design they're going to find in this or that area with this or that enemy, but it's also kind of in the sense of the exaggeration of the some of the characters works in favor, not of the story, but of the characters themselves, because it adds more quirk to them, because they aren't being these characters are all normal and that physically speaking you can identify with, because that will probably take away the magical and the fantastic aspect out of it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it's not like I'm praising the exaggerations, nor am I trashing them. And I'm not neutral either. I like these exaggerated characters, not the type of, I prefer like normal bodies, for girls, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to see these exaggerations for these characters that otherwise we will just dismiss. Because taking the Queen for example, or Odin himself, that looks freaking huge as if he was like some kind of giant, you look at Gwendolyn and Odin and like that's her dad. He's like 5 times bigger than her, in all sense of the word. So, okay, that was a bad point. So, going back to the Queen Fairy, it's like she's a very serious queen. You barely see anything. You don't see anything at all when it comes to like funny comedy or stupid, silly things. No, she's a very serious character, and the development she goes through and her situations in the war is like really serious. And maybe what George Kamitani was trying to do with these exaggerated designs was to have the player remember that this is a fantasy, that this is fiction, and to appreciate the characters and to look them with different eyes, not just in physically speaking, but like a reminder that don't take them too seriously when they're being too serious. I don't know. It kind of contradicts the dark, tragic theme of the game, but at the same time, it offers that little break away from all of those Western RPGs, for example, that all their serious characters look actually serious, and therefore some of them maybe even be forgettable, But yeah, all these years I'm still trying to make sense, trying to make a correlation between the art style and the story and the character. Or maybe it's just like that because Kamitani is a bit of a cynic and wants to create and develop these characters that are like, stupid and ridiculously looking, and give them like really intense and interesting and well-written personalities. I don't know, I find that appealing for some reason. So, but forget about the art style. Take a look at almost every other character in the game, whether they're really sexy or not. I know the fairies, the enemy fairies you fight, like, holy shit, what the hell is she wearing? She's literally wearing nothing but a thong, And the girls in the Inferno Palace, they're like the same. They're wearing nothing but a freaking thong. And that's really, the game's an eye candy. Let's leave it at that. But if you take time to appreciate how the characters are designed from top to bottom, how overly beautiful they look, and how detailed their outfits or their movements or their animations are, that's when you just forget about the fan service, man, for a while, and try to take a look at it from an artistic point of view, and you just you fall completely in love with the visuals. It's just a beautifully visually... damn, I'm nerding out here, man. I told you, this is probably my favorite video game in existence when it comes to graphics. this is it. I can't think of another one. I'm a big fan of cel shading graphics. Maybe some games like Rogue Galaxy, Dragon Quest VIII, or Valkyria Chronicles should be up there, in my top if I ever make that top. But I can't think of another game right now that will take the first place out of Odin Sphere. It's just the most beautiful video game I played in my whole life. Alright, gameplay mechanics. This is an action RPG, and I just told you that it's in 2D, and I just told you that you play through 5 different characters. And yes, you gotta play them all. You can't just keep one. No. And every character controls extremely different. So Gwendolyn fights with a spear, and her controls are phenomenal. But I would like to first review the PS2 version and then the remaster, because in terms of controls and combat, trust me, they're very different. They do feel very different. The remaster feels completely refined and probably more or 100% true to the vision of the developers, that because of budget reasons and hardware limitations, they couldn't nail it in the PlayStation 2 original version. But they did so in the PS4 in the remaster, which was bonkers. Perfect controls, perfect combat, perfect movement, perfect balance. The game's still challenging. No serious difficulty spikes, no nonsense, because Odin Sphere, the original, is full of spikes, nasty spikes, but there's like 10,000 of it. Like more than half of the bosses, or even some of the regular enemies are like, what the hell, man? But the biggest flaw, the biggest thing, the two biggest things that mark the difference between the controls and combat and difficulty between both versions. The two biggest things are, number one, in the original, you get this POW bar, you land, you execute 5, 6, 7, 8 attacks or chain attacks or whatever, you just click, you mash the action button like 10 times, and all of a sudden that POW bar has been decreased, and your character needs to they stay completely still, vulnerable, dizzy, without being able to move, and of course the enemies beat the crap out of you. You gotta if that's gonna happen to you, you better walk away. But you're not gonna do that because you want to keep beating the crap out of your enemies. So that option was still there in the remaster, but it was far reduced. You can do like 30, 40 hits maybe. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I haven't played the game in a while. But you can do like a lot of hits, a lot of damage without having to worry about that. Of course, if you just constantly button mash your controller for like 2 minutes, you will have the POW bar decreased, and you will get that status, that DC status, that lasts for like 5 seconds. It feels like 10 fucking seconds in the original version, and yeah, it just ruins the immersion of the combat. That was Odin Sphere, the original version. That was its biggest flaw, and it's also one of the reasons why it's so difficult, because remember some of the Tales games? How you gotta go forward, attack for a bit, and then run away to the back, going back and forth, Remember that? Well, this was done in the same with that same mentality. Like you gotta go back, fight a little bit, and then retreat, and wait until the bar fills up again so you can attack again. So it's a pain in the ass, to be honest. And the second biggest flaw that the game has is that makes it so excruciatingly painful is, sometimes it can be very frustrating, and this wasn't removed in the remaster, but it was kind of rebalanced, so it feels better, it doesn't feel as frustrating. The thing that I'm talking about is that it's kind of like in Castlevania, in the NES games, or Ninja Gaiden, that sometimes the enemy hit you, and they do this knockback, to you. You fall 2-3 meters feet away from them, and it takes for the characters takes a little bit of time to stand up or to recover from that. And also a lot of attacks make you dizzy, whether you still have the bar filled up, the action bar, some they make you dizzy, and of course, again, you can't move, you can't do anything, and they beat the crap out of you. And it's just really frustrating. Again, this wasn't removed in the remaster, but it was toned down, more balanced, so people wouldn't find that frustrating or as frustrating. So it was just the remaster just polished the combat to perfection. It already had this huge potential. And it doesn't matter which character you play as. I know you're probably thinking of Mercedes, because she's pretty much like a shoot 'em up, because she fights with her bow and she fights with her bow and fires bullets, so you can fly around, and it's the same, if you run out of power, she gets dizzy and unmobile and she stands there like an idiot. And you gotta recharge. A pain in the ass with Mercedes has a really big up and down. The biggest up is that she's the most powerful character in the game because of this powerful artifact. I mean, you get to shoot at the enemies and you stagger them. It's not like you can shoot them and they go through the bullets, whether they're being hurt or not, and they walk towards you and then they still hurt you. No, you kind of like start firing them and you stop their movement. They stop. You stagger them, right? And so that's, if you attack from a safe distance, including some of the bosses, you'll be fine. You're overpowered, but you got limited ammo. It's not infinite. If it was infinite, Mercedes will be fucking broken as fuck, right? So you gotta recharge. And to recharge, you gotta stand down. You can't recharge while flying, if I'm not mistaken. No, you gotta go back to the ground, and you spend it takes 5 seconds, which again in the original version feel like 10 seconds, but it's only like 4 or 5 seconds recharging, and then she's very vulnerable when that happens. So, and also she's very weak. She doesn't have a lot of defense, so it's there's this specific way in which you have to fight with her. It's not complicated, don't worry, but you always gotta keep your distance no matter what. But if the enemies start getting towards you and there's a lot of them and you're running out of ammo, yeah, that's when it gets dangerous. So every character controls differently, you see. It takes a while to get used to every one of them. Easiest to get into are the first two, Gwendolyn and Cornelius, because they're basically hack and slash. And their controls feel like that, like a regular 2D hack and slash game. But then you get to Mercedes, and it's weird. And then you get to Oswald, who also fights with a sword and she'll be hack and slash, but he's so fast and chaotic and hard to control sometimes, especially when he transforms into the shadow and fights with his claws. He's just so hard to control and chaotic. That was made on purpose to rebalance the character, to avoid breaking him, so he wouldn't be broken. And then there's Velvet, who fights with her whips, and she's also kind of like, not like Castlevania at all, man. So it's different, it's weird, and it gets complicated, right? But that's also the magic of these characters, fighting with them and controlling them, learning how to move and how to approach certain enemies, because you do fight the same enemies over and over again. And yeah, a gripe I have with this game is that the game has a lot of recycled bosses. Like you fight Odin, or his general, I forget his name, his nasty character, with 3 characters. You fight, there's only 20 major bosses in the game, and you fight them over and over again. You don't fight them on each character arc, don't worry, but in most arcs, you gotta fight them. But that's also fun, because you're now controlling a totally different character. And now you gotta figure out, if you defeated this boss with Gwendolyn this way, it's not gonna work the same way if you're controlling Velvet. That's what makes it also really interesting. Now, the leveling system of this game works as follows. In the original version, you couldn't get any experience by merely fighting enemies. You had to gather items and sometimes grow them. There's a growth system. You plant a seed, and a small tree, a small plant grows, and it gives you an item that you can use as a buff, debuff, whatever, but it's mostly to consume food, which also heals HP. That's there's no healing potions in this game. Well, there are actually potions, but we'll get to this. We'll get to that. So you use food not only to recover, but also to gain experience. And also, with every character arc, you eventually go into the Puka village. And that's the only place in the original game where you can enter the restaurants. There's 2 of them, and 2 of them work similarly. Okay, you go there, and if you have the right ingredients that you gathered in the fields, in the areas or dungeons, the cook can cook something for you, a meal that can give you a lot of experience. And this is how you practically abuse the experience system in this game, and you will need to do just that, because it's a really difficult game. But in the remaster, the same features carry over, nothing changes. You still have this food, these ingredients, and you also have potions in both games that you can mix You can mix this ingredient with this other ingredient as long as you have an empty flask. And then, boom, you create a potion. And that potion can be a healing potion or a fire spell or something like that. But you can only carry a specific amount of items with you. It's one of those games. Limited inventory. Oh yeah. It's not like you can just create 99 healing potions. No. You have a limited space, which also makes the game a little bit more challenging than your average. So, in the remaster, the big advantage is that often in the areas, no matter the character you're controlling, you can cook as well. There are safe areas where you can just talk to people, and there's a cook in there. You don't necessarily have to go back to Puka village. You have this cook in there, and you can cook and level up. So I like that, because it was a pain in the ass to having to restart the whole stage or like give up in a certain area and go back to Puka village and level up. It was a pain in the ass in the original. So adding cooks in the middle of the fields, that was genius. Because he didn't make the game any easier or harder. It just removed the pain in the ass of having to go back to freaking Puka village. So that was great in the remaster. So that's how you mostly level up in this game. But in the remaster, and this also makes the remaster easier, you do gain experience by fighting enemies. Not a lot though, but you do gain experience. So what I'm trying to say is that it's far less grindy than the original PS2 version. What's curious is that if you buy the remaster, PS3, PS Vita, or PS4, the game lets you play as the original game with refined controls, but with the same penalties as before. Do yourself a favor, and if you don't own the original PS2 version or have never played it, if you buy the remaster, do that. Just so you can see the big differences between the gameplay and the combat and the controls and the gameplay mechanics of both games. It's interesting. Anyway, I could go on with the gameplay mechanics. Well, I guess one last thing I want to say is that this isn't a Metroidvania, but every stage has branching paths. But no matter what you do, the boss is always, the major boss of the stage is always at the same spot. Okay? You can just choose to go straight in a straight line, to fight the boss, or you can choose different paths, which I strongly recommend in both versions, to get better items, better equipment, maybe more money, more experience, more ingredients, So it helps a lot and greatly reduces the grinding you'll have to do, especially near the end of the game with the final bosses. This is a game. This is a bit of a spoiler, but you need to know, if you're planning on playing this game, you need to know that at the end of the game, once you've completed all 5 story arcs, there's a final story arc that involves every single one of them. But they aren't stages, they're bosses. And wait, in the remaster you can just fight any boss you want. In the original I think you can do the same. I don't remember. I don't remember if you gotta fight the first final boss with Gwendolyn and then or you can just choose whatever, But every character has their own final boss. And no, there's not like ultimate final boss for everybody, no. There's 5 final bosses. Okay, Gwendolyn has one final boss. Cornelius has one. Mercedes has one. Oswald has one. Velvet has one. And once you've beaten all 5 bosses on any order, the game ends. You get the credits. Okay? And they're freaking brutal. Some are pretty standard bosses. They have their quirks, but others are like really unique and creative and annoying. Like Gwendolyn's boss and Velvet's final boss is like Velvet's final boss is the worst. I despise that boss battle. I hate it. The others are fine. Even Gwendolyn, is kind of fine. Gwendolyn involves a lot of platforming, because you gotta climb, and that's all I'm gonna say to avoid spoilers, but it's kind of a pain in the ass, but it's okay, But damn, man, the Velvet's final boss is like, holy crap. Anyway, so what else can I say about the gameplay? It's fluid, it's fast, the combat is amazing, the pacing is incredible. The game doesn't waste your time with a lot of chit chat or meaningless dialogue or comedy or slice of life, whatever. You're barely gonna get any of that. There's not that much dialogue. Usually you get a scene that lasts for a few minutes and then there, you're thrown back into the action again. Or you have full control of your character in town, where you can buy stuff, or in the Puka village, or in the safe areas in the remaster. So the pacing of this game is absolutely incredible. It never feels boring, it never feels slow. It may feel repetitive though, because all you're doing is fighting in 2D and moving in 2D and fighting through the same stages, and sometimes the same enemies, and sometimes the same bosses. But like I said, each time you're controlling a different character, and they control very differently, so that breaks out of the repetitive routine the game has when you start a brand new arc. Okay, so it's masterful, the pacing is incredible. You're not gonna feel bored with this game at all. Maybe. I hope not. I don't think so. So, that's it for the gameplay. Which version is the best one? Obviously the remaster. The remaster is nearly a perfect game, man. It's in my ranking scores that I've been doing. I haven't ranked it, I probably will after this episode. But yeah, it's probably a 9 point something. Probably 9.4, at least 9.2, it's just nearly perfect. Whereas the PS2 version, well, it's gonna be kind of hard giving it a 9, but maybe. Yeah, so stick to the remaster simply because it includes the original, which makes owning the original PS2 version pointless, unless you're a collector like me and you want to own it physical, because it's dirt cheap. I think you can find it for like $10 or $15 anywhere. It's just the remaster includes that original version, so there's just no point. It's like White Knight Chronicles 2 on the PlayStation 3. That's why you often see White Knight Chronicles 1 for like $5, because there's just no point owning it. It is included in the second game. You get both games in one. So in the remaster, no matter the version, you get both games in one, right? But if you're a collector like me, yeah, own it, buy it, because it's dirt cheap nowadays, before it goes crazy expensive one day. It's an Atlus game, remember that? Yeah. Strongly recommend this game. The remaster is an ultimate masterpiece, one of the best, if not the best remaster ever created, in my opinion. Alright, people, that's it. I'll be discussing some of the spoilers. So if you haven't beaten this game, if you want to tune out, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting this podcast. Remember, it's only available on YouTube because people are supporting this on Patreon. And in fact, it was originally planned as a Patreon exclusive, but I just decided to upload it here on YouTube so everybody can listen to it. But this is something from Patreon. Link to my Patreon in the description. If you want to support this podcast, please do so in the link below. Any amount of money. It's not like, oh, you gotta join at the $10 tier. No, you do get some extra benefits the higher the tier. But if you want to support this podcast or this channel whatsoever, link in the description to my Patreon. And so the podcast can continue being uploaded on YouTube. And that's it. See you next time, I guess. Spoilers start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so don't worry, there's not going to be a lot of spoilers. There's not that much to discuss except the ending, which is, it leaves a lot to be discussed, but I'll keep it short. But the one thing that I couldn't say before about Odin is that, well, one of the most messed up things about the game is, how Griselda dies at the beginning? Well, that wasn't Gwendolyn's only sister. It turns out that Velvet is Gwendolyn's half-sister. Because Odin, little fucker, the guy had an affair. Yeah, and he's also Velvet's father. When this gets revealed, because during the first chapters of the game, there's a lot of confusion on how Velvet and Odin behave towards each other. And at the beginning, you're like, is Velvet his lover, or was his lover or something? And then Gwendolyn notices that, and she's like, what the fuck is going on here? So once that happens, and Velvet, you find out that Velvet is practically his daughter, and when Gwendolyn finds that out, it also changes her perspective. So I really want to mention this during the spoiler section, because that only enforces the amazing writing and character development that both Velvet and Gwendolyn and even Odin get, near the end of the game. You understand everything at the end, and you're like, your perspective has changed drastically. You just don't see these characters with the same eyes you did before. And obviously Gwendolyn gets mad because She feels like her father dismissed Griselda's death and gives a lot more preference to Velvet. This throws her into a... I mean, you fight Velvet with Gwendolyn, and she's really angry, But when she finds out the truth that she's her sister, that kind of changes things for her. And that's a really humane, a really realistic character development that she gets. I guess I'm that type of person that the more realistic and humane development characters get in movies, shows, anime, video games, whatever, books, the more I like them. Not only because I can relate to them easily or I can understand them better, but also because it just feels more, what's the word here? Like it makes more sense. Okay? And I need things to make sense to me. Even if I love confusing people with my books. You read some of my books and you're like, what the fuck? But I want them to make sense to you emotionally. So when these types of development happen in characters, and they make sense emotionally to me, maybe not logically, but emotionally, I give more preference. So even though I can't relate, I don't have any half sisters or brothers that I know of. I'm pretty sure I don't, but who knows, right? So I can't relate to Gwendolyn or Velvet or their situations, but their situation is, how many times have we seen this? There's a lot of families like that in real life, especially in countries like the US. No offense, but that's a reality in your country. You guys have way more half sisters and half brothers and divorces and marriages. You have them galore, man. But that's a situation in the entire world. Actually, has become kind of like that, even here in Mexico. But it's a realistic and humane situation, and how Gwendolyn's perspective changes. Like, she needs to divide her love for her father, her love for her sister, and her love for her deceased sister, and decide and make sense out of that. That's a really tricky situation. And on top of it all, she's dealing with Oswald, because the romance in between Oswald and Gwendolyn is kind of weird here. Basically, Oswald does something very fucked up at the beginning, but later his real intentions are revealed. Odin hires him for a mission, and if he succeeds in the mission, the conditions are that, and Oswald tells him that, I want your daughter. I want Gwendolyn to be mine. And at that moment, you kind of like hate Oswald, like, fuck you, man. Gwendolyn's not an object and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, kind of like your inner feminist that you're going to pretend doesn't exist, kind of like, emerges from there, like, what the fuck, But Oswald's true intentions are revealed later. That he noticed the relationship between Gwendolyn and Odin. He noticed that Odin was treating his daughter as nothing more than a fucking soldier, than a general soldier, and that's it. And Oswald hates that because he can relate to that because of, because the people who kind of raised him, also treated him the same way, so he relates to that and wants to rescue Gwendolyn from that. So at the beginning, Gwendolyn's like, well, how dare you, so I'm nothing but an object to be traded, as a reward, as some kind of trophy. And then Oswald starts revealing his true intentions to her, and then Odin kind of puts a spell in her that will force her to fall in love with him. But eventually she kind of breaks out of that spell. And at one moment she's like, I'm falling in love with Oswald because he kind of rescued me and he wants me to be free, to express myself freely and to live my life freely, with no one pulling my strings, right? And she notices that, but by then it's like it's not clear if she's still under the spell or that she's truthfully falling in love with him. I don't know, it's romance. I know most of you aren't into that, but I kind of am when it comes to that type of romance. The cliche average romance you see everywhere is kind of like dumb, I don't give a shit about it. But this is the type of romance that I do care about. This is that the one that is well written and intriguing, and it eventually leads to freedom. Yeah, I'm a freedom advocate. I fucking hate censorship nowadays. We're not gonna get into that topic, but understand where I'm coming from and why I'm such a fanboy of this particular couple and particular romance between these two characters. And the last thing I want to talk about, there's not much spoilers to talk about this game. There's I don't know. I guess I could say some things about Odin, how he realizes that he was wrong about certain things, and how he fucked up his relationship with his daughter. That happens in the game actually, which is incredible for a video game. So what else? Velvet, Mercedes falling in love with Velvet's brother. I forget the guy's name though, but she falls for him, because he gets turned into a frog. But then it's kind of messed up, but he regains his human form, and he turns out to be one of the bad guys, and he was doing his own thing. What I mentioned at the beginning, that this game doesn't really have, most of the antagonists aren't bad people, are people that just think differently, and because of their circumstances and the experiences they went through, they do things in a certain way that affect others, or that others may perceive as evil. I love writing antagonists like that, and I love, reading or watching antagonists like that, where you learn their motivations and you understand them better, and it's just awesome, awesome writing. So the last thing I want to talk about is the ending. This is, yes, I'm going to spoil the ending. So spoiling the ending in 3, 2, 1, there we go. Well, guys, it's a pretty fucked up ending. It's a tragic ending, and it's a true ending. It's not like there's a different ending where there's a different outcome in a... No. This is the ending no matter what. And that ending is pretty much the end of the world. The world ends. Creatures are destroyed, everything's gone, Ragnarok happens, and only 3 characters are left alive. Well, actually 4. Gwendolyn and Oswald remain as the only humans left alive, even though Gwendolyn is Valkyrie, not 100% human, but she's practically human, right? So they're left alive, kind of like a brand new, rebooted Adam and Eve. Like, yeah, fuck, have children, repopulate the world. I'm not kidding. And then at the end, Cornelius, instead of regaining his human form, he remains a puka. But then Velvet, his girlfriend, gets turned into a puka herself. I think it's by choice, I don't remember if it was by free will. I think it's by free will. Because something that happens at the end, she destroys the cauldron. That's her final boss, that big fucking cauldron. That's Velvet's final boss, annoying as hell. Because you gotta do a lot of platforming as well. But yeah, they destroy all of that so people can be free. You know how 9 out of 10 Japanese RPGs back in the day were about gaining freedom, Nowadays, they feel like they're the same, but now being destroyed by people who want to destroy freedom. The fucking irony, man. Anyway, so that happens, and now Velvet is a puka. So now they are the only 2 pukas left in the world. Every single other puka or human being, or even mystical creature, or angelic or infernal creature is fucking dead. And Mercedes, well, she turns herself... Well, first she becomes the queen of the fairies because her mom dies. And that's the development I mentioned at the beginning with Mercedes. That's she grows up. She's now responsible for all of her subjects, and she has a place in the world. And that makes her, man. It's just, you gotta play this game. When you play as Mercedes, like I said before at the beginning, you kind of resent her, and you're like, she's a dumb bitch, But at the end, you're like, oh, well, you found respect for her. And what she does, she sacrifices in order to save the world. Mercedes might as well be the most important character in the game, because no Mercedes, it's game over. If Mercedes had died at some point in the story, the entire world of Odin Sphere would have been completely destroyed with no hope whatsoever for the future. Oswald, Velvet, everybody will be fucking dead. Why did that doesn't happen, of course, because Mercedes gets turned into the Yggdrasil, the big fucking tree that gives the world life. So at least in terms of nature, the story, the world will be reborn and can be populated by pukas and humans, like from their descendants of these 2 couples, So but that's the ending. That's the ending of the game, and that's it. So it kind of like, I remember talking to some friends about this, about the possibility of the game having some kind of sequel one day. Like maybe we'll find in the world that Oswald and Gwendolyn and Velvet and Cornelius populated, by having children. So that would be interesting, a sequel based on that world, where the main characters know they are descendants of these protagonists of the first game. That will be interesting. It's probably never going to happen because Kamitami doesn't like sequels. He said that before, and he's never done a single sequel, like a direct sequel, Every single game he's done. But every single game from Vanillaware is completely standalone, not even in the same universe, nothing to do with each other. There may be a connection between Princess Crown and Odin Sphere because Odin Sphere was basically a spiritual successor to Princess Crown, but that game wasn't developed by Vanillaware. It was developed by Atlus, and Kamitami just worked on it. And other people who worked on it also created Vanillaware with George Kamitami, but that was it, It never came out of Japan, so I can't make the connection. Sorry guys, because it isn't even fan translated. I'm still hoping after so many freaking years for a fan translation for that game or for Atlus to bring it back. But if they do, it's probably going to be full of political bullshit. So I'd rather have a fan translated version of it one day. Anyway, so will this game ever get a sequel or something? No, I don't think so. It's almost a guarantee it will not. Never. It will remain as a standalone masterpiece and a stupidly strongly recommended game that if you haven't played, you should definitely play. So Odin Sphere, masterpiece. What else can I say about a game that I covered to death in this channel? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. And thank you to the awesome people you're seeing right now that contributed to this podcast episode and made it happen. Thank them as well.